So recently, I just finished Tales of Arise, and I wanted to do a review for it, and I'm probably going to do a review for the DLC as well at the end of this video, because quite frankly, I loved it. I really enjoyed this game, but it is far from a perfect game. So as I do with every review, I'm going to start off about the things I loved. And one of the things I absolutely loved about this game, and this is probably my favorite thing about this game, was the story it told. Now, without giving too many spoilers or without spoiling anything major in the plotline, you're introduced to a character that we come to know as Iron Mask. And he is a slave who shows that he has a very righteous sense of justice and has a heart of gold. And he encounters this mysterious woman who has powers that are strange to a lot of people. The powers being that anybody that comes into contact with her pretty much gets electrocuted or shocked. But you've come to find out that Iron Mask can withstand that pain, and they start on a journey together. The journey initially starts out as a tale of overcoming the 5 lords of the 5 different realms that are pretty much enslaving what's known as the Dahnan people, the people that are on the planet itself. And they're enslaved by a group known as the Renans, which are a much higher class group of people that essentially, you find out, live out in space in a way. They're not from the planet, and when they arrived, they enslaved all of these people. And it led to this interesting plot line where you're going through and you're seeing all these different realms and how that relationship between the Renans and the Dahnans persisted. And it's a fun story to follow along. And I think one of the things that makes the story so amazing is you see a lot of growth and development in your 2 main characters. The main character, who we initially know as Iron Mask, is Alphen. And the female counterpart, the second lead, the love interest, is Shionne. And we see growth of those 2 characters. You also see growth with 4 of the other characters that become part of your party. I don't want to give any names just in case you've never played this game, because I think some of the characters that join your party are nice surprises. Some of them are a little bit more on the nose, like, hey, when they show up, you know that's a party member. And sometimes it's like, oh, wow, I didn't actually think this person would join our party and embark on the journey with Alphen and Shionne. But every one of those characters has their own sort of growth too, especially with some of the side missions that you get later in the game and within the DLC that kind of just closes off their tales and kind of gives you an idea of how much they've grown from when you meet them to where they're at by the time you finish the DLC and complete the entire story. That brings me to the second thing I loved, the love story. The romance storyline that persists throughout the game, where Alphen and Shionne do not trust each other. They're both from different types of lives. Shionne, because of her, what she calls thorns, the ability that attacks people anytime they touch her, has been shut off and alone for forever. And Alphen's been a slave who has no memory of his past. And you see them slowly over time grow that connection and eventually fall for each other. And the way that story is told, hands down, best Tales of love story ever. I would say this storyline is easily top 3, maybe top 2 of any Tales game ever. But I will say that the love story is number 1. And that is probably the only thing in this game outside of the refined combat system that beats every other Tales game. And that brings me to the last thing I really loved in this game. And that is the combat system. The combat system is so smooth and so fun to play. The customization is greatly detailed. You get multiple arts and you can choose which way to combine them. Alphen can use 6 different arts on the ground, and he can use 6 different arts while in the air, and you learn different arts over time. Some of them a little bit better than others. Alphen doesn't have any arts that are extremely broken besides one. I don't want to say the name of that one, but the initials are RS. And once you find out about that art, you find out that Alphen can just shred everything. the game becomes a little easy unless you're playing on a higher difficulty. But if you're playing on normal or easy, once you unlock that art, most boss fights melt in a few hits if you use that art and then do his charge flame attack right after. And it makes the game a little bit less challenging. So if you really want to challenge yourself, maybe avoiding that one art is really helpful. But whether you're using that art or not, I still felt the combat was rewarding and the combat was very fun. And I felt that using every character was really fun. There's combat trials in the game where you can use each character individually, or you could switch control mid-combat, or you could just primarily control one of the other characters, and they're all fun to use. My one that I didn't like so much was Xion. While she is an art user, I primarily like her being my healer, and I just didn't like playing as her because I'd rather just have a support character being the healer while I'm one of the characters doing damage. But using Alphen or using your other melee character or any of your other art users, really, really fun. And I had a lot of great fun just experimenting and playing around with different arts. And by the time I was done with the game, I never felt like the combat got stale, the combat got repetitive. It always felt fun the whole time. Every freaking time I played the game, the combat felt smooth, it felt fun, and I never got bored with it. Now that brings me to what I'm mixed about. Now, there are a couple things I was mixed about with this game. First and foremost, the world felt more linear and enclosed than ever before. One of the things I love about the Tales games and JRPGs in general is they usually give you big worlds to explore. A recent example of this is Final Fantasy VII Rebirth and Final Fantasy XVI. While those worlds are not as, well, I will say Rebirth is huge, but while Final Fantasy XVI is not as big, when you enter into an area, it feels like you got a wide open space that you can go exploring. Now, was there a lot to explore? No, and that was one of my main criticisms about Final Fantasy XVI. But in this game, I feel like everything's more linear. The areas you cannot access are the ones that are shut off. And then the areas you can access put you around the point of basically running through linear dungeons. And none of the dungeons are really like super over the top, in depth, hard to navigate, you're fighting constant enemies type dungeons. Most of the dungeons are pretty linear as well. And that was probably one of my like things I was kind of like, okay, this is nice because it allows me to enjoy the story and move through the story at a smooth pace. But at the same time, you kind of miss it as a lifelong JRPG fan. If you're somebody who loves JRPGs, you kind of miss that open exploration that many JRPGs give you. There is not much open exploration that you get. There's not many secret side areas that you can go visit, not many secret dungeons that you can go visit. There is one long group of like secret areas you can visit that all have kind of like references to other Tales games at the end of the game. That's post game. But when it comes to like just side dungeons, secret bosses, that sort of thing, there's not much in terms of exploration and finding those things. And that was one of the things I was mixed on because there is the pro that I was really into the story. So I got to move through the story beats a little bit faster than I normally would in a regular JRPG. So that was nice. But at the same time, it's kind of like, I really want to explore more. I want to spend more time in this world and explore it. Another thing I was mixed on was the world itself. The world itself felt fun to navigate in a way, but there were certain parts of it where it just felt kind of like bland. And I know this might be a nitpicky thing, but there were areas, and especially like combat areas or dungeons where you'd go into, where it didn't feel like there was anything memorable about them, right? You go into a forest, it doesn't feel as memorable as some other games and their forest areas. You go into a volcano area, it doesn't feel memorable because you're going through two semi-small areas and then you're at a boss fight. And nothing about those set pieces, nothing about those environments really felt memorable. So I felt like if those two things would have been refined and fine-tuned, I think it would have really, really helped out the game. I think the game could have really, really have been perfected had they just fine-tuned the areas you can visit and the exploration of the game. I think if they would have fine-tuned those and made those a little bit more wide open and a little bit more fun to explore and a little bit more fun to visit, you would have had a perfect game. Now, there is one thing that I disliked about this game: the side quest. Now, as somebody who I'm impartial to side quests. I can deal with them, I can deal without them. But I'm always going to be a firm believer that if you want to put side quests in your game, make them interesting side quests. Now, I'm not going to dog on some of the stories that the side quests give, because there are a couple of side quests where the stories attached to them are amazing, especially in the DLC. The DLC had some really amazing side quests that had amazing stories. But there are some main game side quests that have some amazing stories attached to them. But the goals of the side quests are so bland. One of the goals of many of the side quests is go collect these certain materials. But if you're exploring the world and having fun, there's a very heavy chance you have the materials you need before you even take on the quest. So what's the point of that side quest if you just have the materials right away and you give it to them? Like, is there nothing else I can do? Another very, very commonly used type of side quest: hey, go beat this slightly harder Zoogle, which is the enemies in this world. Go beat this slightly harder Zoogle. We're not going to make it a boss level Zoogle, but go beat this slightly harder Zoogle. And sure, it's cool to go fight another enemy, but it's just a revamped version of an enemy you're going to see countless times, because there was no diversity in these. Now, there was a couple of side quests that did something different. There's a side quest that you can encounter later in the game, where you basically boss run all the lords that you fought throughout the game, with a massive multi-boss fight at the end that is really challenging, because I think all of these were like level 90 and above. But it was really fun and challenging. Those were the type of side quests I enjoyed. But when it was just go to this area, fast travel to this area, defeat a non-boss enemy that's just got a little bit more HP, or here's your quest. Oh, you already have the materials, turn them in, you're done. Those were boring. And if you're going to put side quests in the game, give me more stuff like that boss run side quest, or a secret boss fight side quest, or maybe a side quest that tells a lot of story and you go and interact with 4 or 5 different characters that you encountered and you just learn some more lore. Don't give me material fetch quest that isn't for hard materials that require some effort. Don't give me go defeat an elite enemy side quest because they have double the HP of your normal enemy. And that brings me to one other thing I disliked about this game. Enemy variety was lacking. Remember I said that a lot of those side quests is just like defeat a stronger version of an enemy you've already encountered. The reason why that bothers me so much as a side quest is because you're going to encounter the same type of enemies over and over. The only difference is in one area they're going to be wind-based, one area they're going to be fire-based, one area they're going to be ice-based. I really like diversity in enemies. If you're going to give me an ice enemy, give me something different from another wolf or another boar or another ape. When all 4 or 5 of my areas have wolves and they have boars and they have rock golems, they have apes, it gets repetitive fighting the same enemies because they all share the same weaknesses. None of them have variances in weaknesses. They all share the same weak spots. So it's like, what is the point in like fighting these enemies anymore? Because while the combat's fun and the combat's challenging, and especially the boss fights, the everyday enemies, at one point when I realized that I was strong enough to complete the area, I just avoided everything. I quit fighting everything. And I'm a person who loves combat in games, and I love fighting. But even as much as I love the combat in this game, I would avoid fighting because there would be nothing new. I would run into the same enemy I just seen in the previous realm, but this time it's snow instead of fire, or it's wind instead of water. And I'm just thinking to myself, like, that's kind of lame. But that's just, it's a mild nitpick, because for most people that's not going to matter. But for me, I like games that have just an increasing diversity of enemies. And I know that they can only have so many different types of enemies, but it would have been nice if each area kind of had their own like exclusive enemies. Now, I will give it this. All of the bosses felt fun and unique, especially the side bosses. The side bosses and the The hidden bosses in the game, absolutely amazing and fun. And then the main story bosses as well, super fun to fight. None of them ever felt like they were repetitive unless there was a narrative reason for them to repeat, like you fighting the same boss twice through story or something like that. But when it comes to like, you don't fight 6 different giant deer and that's a secret boss. You don't fight 6 of those guys. But in every world or every realm, you're going to fight a type of wolf, right? And in multiple realms, you're going to fight bees. And in multiple realms, you're going to fight these giant Yeti looking creatures that they call apes. And that just felt kind of bland. But my 2 negatives about the game are so minuscule and didn't really ruin my experience for the game. They're just things I kind of noticed while I was playing the game. My positives far outweigh the negatives. And even the stuff I'm mixed on, there were some positives to be found out of the mixed stuff too. Once again, while I love my open world JRPGs, when you're telling such a good story and you're telling such an interesting narrative, giving me that linear JRPG experience wasn't necessarily a bad thing. While I would have loved more of the world to explore, being able to go from point to point and really enjoy the story was a great time for me. And the same beats were with the DLC. It's called Beyond the Dawn. And the DLC has kind of got the same thing to it. But one of the things that the DLC adds to the main game is that it just continues the story in a realistic way. Now, give or take, this is a fantasy world, so realistic way is kind of a stretch. But I mean realistic way in the sense that it didn't show a perfect world after you beat the main storyline. I think a lot of us, especially when we were younger playing games, you envision this perfect world after beating the game. Hey, the heroes won, the heroes did good, now the world is saved. But the DLC plays off of this idea that the world is still imperfect and there's still a lot of problems caused by this issue of slavery of the Dahnan people. And the group is still experiencing that throughout the DLC. And you run into a new character named Nazamil who has a lot of interesting narrative attached to her because of where her lineage comes from and the experiences that she experiences in this imperfect world. And it creates a post-game story that not only makes sense, but it doesn't hurt anything about the ending of the original game, which is a criticism I have to a lot of sequels, especially Final Fantasy X-2. It doesn't hurt the ending to the game. It actually continues the story of the game with that ending intact and made sense. And that's what I love the most about the DLC. The DLC also has some interesting enemies to fight. It had an interesting little, quite a few interesting side quests, because the side quests weren't all just collect materials or go defeat a certain Zoogle. There were side quests that were based specifically on reconstructing the world, which were called reconstruction quests. And then there were these EX quests, which were character specific, that kind of closed off certain things about those characters to give you closure with the characters you fell in love with while playing the main game. Alphonse is about coming into his own world. There is a story that continues and shows you that Alphonse is pretty much going to end up with Xion for the rest of his life. And it closes off that love story so amazingly. And it's a side quest. Those are the type of side quests I loved. And that's why if I was to rate these individually, I would rate the DLC higher than the main game. Because not only do you get the combat and amazing story with it, but you also get those side quests that were fun to experience. And you don't get as many of those in the main game as you did in the DLC. And the DLC is like a 15-hour DLC versus a 60 to 70-hour main game for 100% completion, right? So, putting this all in the one grand package, Tales of Arise and the Beyond the Dawn DLC. If I was to give this a rating, and I'm going to make it simple, I would give it a 9 out of 10. Now, I know I have some negatives, but it is still a 9 out of 10 game. From my experience playing it and the fun I had, this is absolutely a rating of buy it. Especially now that the game's been out for a while. If you have PlayStation Network, you can go download it from PSN for free through PlayStation Plus and play it and experience the game. It has been on sale on Steam at multiple times. It has been on sale on other platforms multiple times. So this game is affordable now. It is 100%. If you love JRPGs or if you love the Tales of series and you've never picked up this game, a 100% buy it now. With that being said, guys, that's it for my Tales of Arise and Beyond the Dawn review. Tell me, guys, what did you think about Tales of Arise if you played it? And if you never played it, does this game sound like something that would interest you? I 100% think this is a game you should give a shot if you love RPGs, especially JRPGs. But I will say, if you're somebody who's like more of like a shooter fan or something like that, I would always recommend giving a game a try. And this game is a great entry point into the JRPG franchise because it's not a game that requires intense skill to master or anything like that. But this is absolutely a fun time for any RPG or JRPG fan. And I would 100% recommend you guys pick it up because I loved it. I loved every ounce of this game that I played. And even with my negatives and even with my nitpicking, I still had a great time and I wouldn't change it for the world. 100% completed the game, all trophies unlocked, completed the game to 100%, everything done. And it was a good 85 hours spent. With that being said, guys, that's it for today's review. Thank you for watching. Bye.